Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
Bethany Beach gets a new police chief. Wicomico County Executive presents her budget. Chesapeake Bay Foundation celebrates victories in Annapolis. The Salisbury Community Players celebrate the Harlem Renaissance, and we talk with Bob Keefe about his new book that explores the growth of clean energy in the United States. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. In our studio this afternoon is Susan Canfora, reporter for Coastal Point. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Don.
So let's first get to the this budget. Wicomico County Executive Julie Giordano has presented her budget for next year, but there seems to be some differences about the revenue cap.
Yeah, she met with the county council this week for a legislative session, and during that legislative session, they discussed preliminary plans for the FY25 $198 million budget. The proposed tax rate is 0.87 cents for every $100 of assessed property value. Among projects to be funded is a design for a new Fruitland primary school and to renovate the county's detention center. The county executive said the tax rate was lowered and the revenue cap broken, but that's okay. She said that's allowed by state law as long as funding is earmarked for education. But the president of the county council, John Cannon, wasn't so sure, and he asked Ms. Giordano if it's really wise to raise taxes to fund Fruitland Primary. He said taxes for residents should be lowered as much as possible. But she told him the council doesn't determine funding sources, and the council wanted to take $20 million from the county's savings fund, but her finance department thought that was rather irresponsible. At the meeting this week, Mr. Cannon said going above the revenue cap has never been done before to help fund a project, and he said it wasn't in the best interest of citizens of Wicomico County to take what he called punitive measures against them and force them to pay more taxes than they would. The budget also includes increases in health insurance and an employee health center. The budget will continue to be under review, and more meetings will be planned to discuss it. It has to be passed by July 1st.
So, by the way, in terms of the money that this is going to be going to, I guess it's the Fruitland Primary School, and I guess some other projects that she wants to have done.
Fruitland Primary School is one of the major ones. Of course, you know, as we've talked about here, the population is growing and there are more students in these schools. Some of these schools are older and they don't have the up-to-date modern technology, so she feels it's necessary to build a new primary school in Fruitland. The question is, how will they fund it? And will they be able to agree on the funding?
And it's a matter of interesting because the revenue cap is really a conservative idea that came out years ago, and she is a conservative by at least the ideology. So it'll be interesting to see how that actually plays out.
We'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah. Also, we understand, by the way, that Bethany Beach has got a new police chief.
Yes, Bethany Beach has a new police chief, and it's 41-year-old Patrick Foley, who's been with the police department for 18 years. He's a native of Massachusetts, and he and his wife have 2 young sons. They live in Sussex County. He was appointed by the town council by unanimous vote early this week, following the firing in January of former police chief Michael Redman, who had a driving under the influence charge last spring and who was fired after a town investigation determined there had been misappropriation of funds that were supposed to have been used for overtime. Also fired at that time was Captain Darren Cathell of the police department. I talked to Chief Foley this week and found him to be excited to take over as chief. He seems to be a man of integrity who wouldn't directly comment on Redmond's infractions, but he did say police must be held accountable for their actions, and Bethany officers through the ranks do not want the current day police department to be portrayed in that light, but to be nothing but accountable. The mayor of Bethany Beach, Rosemary Hardiman, told me Chief Foley and Corporal Justice Norman both applied for the position. And she praised Foley for being hired as a Bethany Beach police officer back in 2006, and a man who steadily progressed through the ranks. The town issued a news release saying the new chief has served in many capacities while earning the respect of his fellow officers and of the community, and that his leadership skills emerged early as a summer police officer. The agency has 12 full-time officers, including the chief, and this summer another 14 seasonal officers will be on duty. Foley said they are the eyes and ears of the agency. He also told me his goals is for the entire agency to stay high on recruitment. We have a very successful seasonal police officer program. We take great pride in that, and it leads to our full-time candidacy and retaining current officers. Those are 2 big goals for the future, recruitment and retainment. Being a police officer requires a lot of passion and integrity He told me the only way to recruit is by displaying that professional image.
Also have, obviously, Redmond in his guilty plea. What do we know about that at this point?
The guilty plea for Redmond, he pled guilty to having a DUI, and he agreed to take part in a first offenders program. And if he passes that first offenders program, the whole charge could be expunged from his record.
The other interesting story is coming out of Ocean City, and we have apparently going to have some Narcan at disposal in Ocean City. Tell us a little bit about that in this effort to make sure that people do not die from an overdose.
Ocean City is joining with Worcester County Goes Purple, and that's for a new initiative to reduce deaths, like you said, from opioid overdoses. And what they want to do is provide Narcan in several locations around Ocean City. The matter was discussed at a recent Ocean City Town Council meeting, and the council voted unanimously to direct their employees to work with Worcester Goes Purple and install boxes containing bottles of Narcan. Debbie Smellin, who is the Worcester Goes Purple president, met with the council, and she said Narcan is offered to the public without a prescription, but sometimes it just isn't available. So the solution is to stock boxes with Narcan and put those boxes beside automated external defibrillators around town. She said Ocean City is a tourist town, and other people come from all over, not just residents, of course, but visitors and tourists come from all over, and if they overdose, Narcan can save their lives. She asked the city council to approve 10 overdose medication dispensary cabinets. Worcester Goes Purple will pay for, maintain, and stock the boxes, which are waterproof, and then the city will install them. No word on the cost for those boxes, but the city manager, Terry McGeehan, said members of the police department, the fire department, everybody is in support of those boxes, and he said he will be happy to work with Worcester Goes Purple to see that the boxes are installed.
Finally, just briefly here, we also have this cannabis issue. Apparently some dispensaries that are going to be going up around, certainly here on the Eastern Shore. I think we got about, I think it's 4 of them, as I recall, a couple here in Wicomico County. What do we know about
That's right. 4 new cannabis dispensaries are coming to the Lower Shore after a drawing by the Maryland Cannabis Administration last month. One of the best descriptions of this increase in dispensaries that I read was, the weed industry is budding in Maryland. And that certainly does describe it. It will be budding twofold in Wicomico County with Elevated Mind and Wellness and DMV exclusives. Both dispensaries approved to open in Wicomico. Another one is coming to Worcester County, Guru Ventures. And Somerset County has gotten the okay for Kind Equity, LLC. Maryland legalized medical marijuana in 2017, and it's big business in Maryland. It accounts for $177 million in sales. The average price is $10 per gram, and the typical customer spends about $404 for each purchase.
Well, we've been speaking with Susan Canfora. She's a reporter for Coastal Point. We appreciate you taking time to talk with us this afternoon.
You're welcome. Always a pleasure.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
With the world's attention focused on the Middle East, a major oil producer, the United States is developing a growing clean energy industry. You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Major boost has come from the Inflation Reduction Act that is pouring millions into the green energy sector. Bob Keefe is executive director of the nonpartisan business group E2. He's written a new book entitled Clean Economy Now, Stories from the Front Lines of an American Revolution. We have on the phone this afternoon. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Don. Great to be with you.
And it's appropriate, obviously, because we have Earth Day coming up here. And one of the major policy issues that you've sort of highlighted in your book immediately is the Inflation Reduction Act that the Biden administration pushed through. How significant is that? And I suppose one of the other questions is, how long-lasting do you think it might be?
Well, it's tremendously significant, Don, and as I lay out in my book, Clean Economy Now, you know, we're coming up, as you mentioned, on Earth Day again, where for the past 54 years or so, we've taken a little bit of time out of our busy lives to actually think about the planet and our environment. This Earth Day, though, is different. It's different because Earth Day is an economic issue now. It's different because the country has rediscovered that we can do big things that benefit our environment and benefit our economy thanks to things like the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, if you look around, my organization, E2, has tracked clean energy project announcements since the IRA was passed 20 months ago. What we know now is that there are more than 300 major clean energy projects coming out of the ground or in the works all across America. Electric vehicle manufacturing plants, battery plants, solar panel factories, wind turbine operations. More than $120 billion in private sector investments done in these industries so far. More than 100,000 jobs announced. When have we ever seen that kind of economic growth coming out of the ground in America? And the good news is we're doing it because, and by doing it, we're going to help combat the climate change issue.
So one of the questions is how long-lasting that might be. I mean, they've poured money into this particular legislation, as it were, but we could have a shift going on. Obviously, somebody else could occupy the White House tomorrow, or there might be a trend away from that in terms of our politics. I mean, how could this just be a shot and then the effect disappears?
Well, potentially, yes, and absolutely that risk is there, Don. Look, we've already had the House of Representatives have already tried to roll back or reduce the Inflation Reduction Act more than 30 times. Oftentimes, those moves were being made by some of the lawmakers who are benefiting most from this economic growth, by the way. But what makes the IRA more durable is that this is legislation. This isn't an executive order. And these policies and these the tax incentives and other things that are at the core of them are scheduled to last for 10 years. More importantly, again, private industry has finally seen the signal, the market signal it needs for government to invest in America. So these are projects that are already in the works in many cases that companies are already investing in. And, again, it's happening all over the country, including in the Delmarva region.
So I'm going to turn to electric cars because I know you note in the book that there's a tremendous amount of investment now going on. Some of the major companies are now saying they want to go all electric down the road in a fairly short period of time. And looking out at the landscape, at least now, it seems like that's a fairly optimistic view in terms of how quickly we will, say, move from, say, fuel that's fossil fuels and then this electric car situation.
Well, I think in any economic transition, Don, you're going to have ups and downs. And it's going to be cyclical sometimes. You know, in a previous life, I spent more than 20 years as a journalist. A lot of that time was covering the technology industry in places like Silicon Valley. And I've witnessed, and we all experienced the dot-com boom and bust. We all experienced the downturn in personal computers. We all experienced some of the ups and downs over which cell phone was going to dominate the world, or if we were going to use digital music or stick with CD-ROMs or CDs. So, you know, these ups and downs happen. We're seeing it a little bit now in the electric vehicle industry, but the fact of the matter is, for all of the doom and gloom we're hearing about EVs are still growing. They're not growing at the pace that they were growing a year ago, and that was a breakneck speed, but they are still growing. And I guarantee if you ask anybody who has purchased an electric vehicle in the past year or two, myself included, they're going to tell you that, man, I don't miss going to the gas station. And the vehicle I drive now is a lot nicer, a lot smoother, a lot faster, and a lot cheaper to operate for sure than gas vehicles. So, you know, the adoption rate, the adoption curve is still moving in the right direction. There's going to be some dips and bumps along the way, but it's clear that with every single manufacturer now looking at electric vehicles, we're headed in that direction for sure.
Well, in terms of the infrastructure that's required beyond just simply the household in which you obviously can get your own electricity if you convert, but if you go long distances, for instance, you're going to be looking for a place to stop off, just as, for instance, you have for a gas-fueled automobile. What about that infrastructure? How quickly is that being put together? I see a few of them, but I don't see a lot of them.
Well, it's not being put together quickly enough, for sure. Remember that the majority of EV owners charge at home. More than 80% of the owners of electric vehicles fill up in their garage or in their driveway rather than going to the gas station down the street. But you're exactly right. We need more charging out there under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act that was passed 2 years ago, where we have a goal. The Biden administration has a goal to put EV chargers every 50 miles on major stretches of highway across this country. And we're definitely seeing a lot more activity in this space. I mean, just last month in Bowie, Maryland, charging company Blink announced it was moving its global headquarters there and is building something like a 30,000 square foot new EV charging factory there in Maryland that's going to produce more of these. And we're seeing other companies ramp up to meet this expected demand all over the country. And let's remember, this has only been about 2 years less than 2 years since the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, and we're just getting started. We shouldn't write this industry off, and we're just getting started.
The other source is hydrogen. How does that fit into the mix, as it were, particularly for automobiles? And is that still viable yet, or what are we looking at there?
Well, hydrogen has been called the quote-unquote Swiss Army knife of fuel because it can be used in so many different ways. You probably remember the nation's efforts, and I guess there's still some companies that are trying to use hydrogen to power our passenger vehicles. It's clear that passenger vehicles are moving toward electricity just because it's bigger. Because it's better and it's cheaper and it's more available. Although, as you mentioned, not available is not enough with charging stations yet. But hydrogen really is seen as a key to things like heavy transportation. Think about airplanes or locomotives or big ships. Think about major industries that require a lot of energy, like steel manufacturing, cement manufacturing, things like that. So we're seeing a lot of activity around hydrogen. The Department of Energy recently announced a program that's going to build quote-unquote hydrogen hubs around the country to help develop this new fuel. But the bottom line is that, again, because of these policies that, as you mentioned, are now at risk, we are starting to drive innovation in America in energy in ways like we've never done before. And that's just going to make us more competitive with the rest of the world in what's expected to be a $23 trillion global marketplace for clean energy.
I want to turn to wind and solar. What do the prospects look like for that? I know China has dominated some of those industries. What are we looking at there in terms of its spread across the country?
Well, right now, just about every single utility in the country is moving to wind and solar. If you look at the pipeline of electric generation projects in the works for this year, about 90% of them more than 90% of them are renewable energy, and that's wind and solar, but it's also batteries, right? You put batteries next to a solar farm or a wind farm, and then when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining, you have power that you can put on the grid. So it's dominating the electricity production in the country going forward, and it's working. Look at a place like Texas, right? Oil and gas capital of the world. Texas is now getting 30, 40, sometimes 50, sometimes 80% of this energy from wind and solar in Texas. Look at California, which of course has been in the solar and wind business for longer than any place in the country, really, or most places in the country. There have been 30 consecutive days now, I think, in California, where the state has produced more than 100% of what it needs for electricity from solar and wind. That's just amazing, and it shows that we can power our economy on clean energy and do it in a way that creates jobs, drives economic growth, and doesn't ruin our planet, which is important on Earth Day.
One of the other things that here on the Eastern Shore is that there's a discussion about offshore wind, and it's certainly getting some pushback from some of the local folks over a number of issues, including just simply the aesthetics. Obviously, we have Ocean City, which is this sort of resort, as it were, What about that pushback in terms of offshore wind and the idea that maybe we're not ready yet, or that you don't want it in your backyard?
Well, actually, just this week, as you probably know, Dominion Energy started work, got its final permits to start work on what's set to be the biggest wind farm in the offshore wind farm in the United States. A project that can supply clean electricity to as many as 660,000 homes. That's a big deal, and it's off the coast of Virginia Beach, almost 30 miles off the coast, I think. As a result, that's creating a lot of jobs, driving a lot of economic growth to build those projects. And look, if we're going to have a cleaner environment, if we're going to have cheaper energy, if we're going to continue to power our economies with all of the additional electricity use we now need for everything from extra computers to artificial intelligence, we've got to generate the electricity to do that. Building offshore wind, if you don't like aesthetics, offshore wind seems like a better option than digging a new coal mine in Ocean City or in a place like Ocean City, or building a new nuclear plant.
So the other thing, too, is that we've got certainly a number of Republicans and conservatives and various state leaders pushing back on the idea of having wind or solar or a lot of these energies that you talk about. What about that, even though at the same time many other states are benefiting from this new industry? Yeah,
absolutely. Well, again, my organization, E2, has been looking at clean energy projects and around the country since the IRA, and of those 300 projects that we've tracked, that we've looked at, Don, 60% of them are in Republican congressional districts. So not a single Republican voted for the Inflation Reduction Act, but the majority of the benefits of that legislation is going to their constituents, to the workers in their backyards. Georgia is the number one state for total number of clean energy projects. I think it might have just got passed by Michigan, but Georgia's right up there. North Carolina is the biggest state for total investments in clean energy. They've got a huge Toyota battery manufacturing plant, for instance, in the town of Liberty, North Carolina. South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, all of these states are benefiting in a big way from this really economic revolution that we're seeing in clean energy. And the point is, Don, this should not be a partisan issue. This should not be a political issue. In my book, I was fortunate, I asked and was fortunate enough to have former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, Republican governor from California, who passed some of the toughest and best climate policies in a Democratic state, to write the foreword for the book Clean Economy Now. And as Governor Schwarzenegger will tell you, this should not be a political issue, and we have shown that, and it's bearing out in the numbers, that this is something that benefits not just blue states or Democrats, not just red states or Republicans. These are red, white, and blue jobs and red, white, and blue economic growth all across the country.
Do you see the manufacturing of these new technologies, whether it's solar, wind, and what have you, shifting back to the United States as opposed to, say, the dominance that we've seen in the past of someplace like China?
Well, absolutely. Look, more than 90% of solar panels right now, Don, are produced in China or other Asian countries. More than 90% of the batteries that are being deployed at just a breakneck speed all around the world are produced by China. Because of the Inflation Reduction Act and other policies, we now have more than 70 battery plants popping up in America right now, including many by foreign companies that are investing in this country to build these factories here and create jobs here. We have almost 70 solar panel factories now being built in America. These were areas that the United States, frankly, invented. We invented the PV cell. We helped invent the technology behind lithium-ion batteries. We invented the commercial wind industry, wind turbine. But these are are jobs and industries that then went overseas because America was lackadaisical and dragged its feet on doing something about climate and clean energy for way too long. Finally, we're starting to build this stuff in America again, and we're set to get back in the game. So we're not going to have to be beholden to China as the next Saudi Arabia for clean energy in the world. We're going to be making it here.
By the way, in terms, of equity, there are a large number of minority communities, for instance, that sit next to industrial sites and so on. And obviously, you also have environmental issues when it comes to some of the mining of this stuff. How do you address those? Because on the one hand, certainly you want to move ahead with, say, solar or wind. On the other hand, or batteries. On the other hand, you've got to deal with the fact that there are environmental issues here.
Well, absolutely. And look, we have the opportunity not just to do this, but to do it right. And it comes at a time when there's increased emphasis, thankfully, on equity, on environmental justice from the federal government, from the Biden administration right now, and hopefully that will continue. But we absolutely have to do this in the right way. And with all of the provisions of the IRA, with all of the provisions of the infrastructure bill, there are community engagement requirements that require companies that are benefiting from these policies to work closely with the communities that they're doing them in. There are wage and benefit requirements so that these jobs are paid a decent wage and come with benefits. And that's, again, part of this revolution that I'm seeing in the clean economy. We're doing this, and we're doing it the right way. This is not the time to turn backward.
So finally, what do you say to people who are, say, employed in some of the older sectors, like coal, for instance, or even natural gas and petroleum, as it were, the idea that their industries are going to go away, obviously, that's particularly of great concern to something like, say, coal in West Virginia or in Wyoming. We've got the shale industry as well, that they could be hurt in the long run.
Absolutely. Well, what I would say is, first of all, thank you for helping power our economy for so long and continuing to power our economy. Look, at the bottom line is these are energy jobs. These are energy industries. Who better to lead the energy industry in America going forward than energy workers and energy companies? What I would say to some of these areas is you need to talk to your politicians, you need to talk to your lawmakers, and start to get some of these new opportunities coming to your state, coming to your region, so you can continue working and feeding your family and not continue to keep the state and your region tied to an industry that's evolving and is threatening to leave you behind.
We've been speaking with Bob Keefe, Executive Director of the nonpartisan business group E2. He's written a new book entitled Clean Economy Now, Stories from the Front Lines of an American Revolution. You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
With Earth Day approaching, there were gains made on the environmental front here in Maryland. You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Among those affecting the Eastern Shore will be greater oversight of sludge from what are called DAF tanks. Meanwhile, there was an effort to prioritize what are known as living shorelines. With us on the phone this afternoon is Alan Girard. He's the Eastern Shore Director of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to actually directly to this DAF tanks, if you can describe a little bit about what they are and what kind of progress you think you've made in terms of getting these things under control.
Yeah, sure. DAF, dissolved air flotation, that's the acronym. Other folks call it these food processing residuals. You know, this is essentially the solid or semi-solid leftovers derived from the rendering of protein, including poultry, seafood, other materials. It's a product that is certified by the Maryland Department of Agriculture to be applied to farmland as a nutrient source. So it's got nutrient content. It can be used as a fertilizer to help crops grow. You know, it also smells And that is a lot of the concern that many communities around Delmarva have been expressing. Folks in the Hebron area, there's a storage tank for this material there that was cited a couple years back. Concerns about the smells emanating from that tank have actually caused the Wacomico County Council to prohibit future siting of those tanks outside industrial areas. So there's a lot of community concern around the storage of the material up in Caroline County. It's been land applied near the town of Ridgely. I was actually at a hearing where one of the town council members testified before the county and said, look, this is an issue that the county really needs to grab control over because it's impacting our community, our students. The smell was coming through one of the schools there. In Talbot County, there was a hearing before one of the agricultural use boards with folks complaining about the smell in their carpets and their furniture when they open the windows. One individual said, you can feel it in your teeth. So just a wide-ranging set of community members impacted by this stuff. And there's water quality impacts, too. The nutrient content varies substantially. There's not good oversight of the material when it's applied to agricultural land to know if it's being applied at safe levels. And so the legislation that passed the General Assembly this session, looks at that issue and it says, look, we need better control over this material. And a lot of the reason why, in addition to the local community concerns, is a significant amount of the material is actually originating from out of state. There's a few rendering plants located in Maryland that generate these food processing residuals that are applied to land. More than half in recent years has actually come from neighboring states into Maryland to be applied to Maryland farmland. Mostly because, in Virginia and Delaware, you got to have a permit to handle this stuff, to store it, to apply it to land. In Maryland, you don't. So neighboring states you do, Maryland you don't. And that's what the legislation does. It says, look, if you're going to handle this material, store it, apply it to land, you need a permit from the Maryland Department of Agriculture. And the department will be able to enforce the terms of that permit. Right now they have the ability to go onto farms to, only when authorized by a landowner to allow entry. With this material, MDA will be able to go on without that authorization and make sure it's being handled safely. So hopefully this will deal with this issue in the state.
Now, in terms, by the way, of, say, the DAF tanks themselves, are those also going to be regulated, or is there, I know that you mentioned a moment ago that there's been sort of a prohibition essentially here in, say, Wacomico County, except I suppose for something that's industrialized-wise. But, I mean, do we expect that this will limit the proliferation of those kinds of tanks?
Yeah, and that's a good question. Like I said, there is a prohibition in Wacomico. Caroline County actually put a moratorium on the siting of those types of facilities in that local jurisdiction. And, this is happening across the state. Carroll County residents have been expressing concern. A lot of the local jurisdictions have wondered, is it their responsibility to deal with an agricultural material that is normally the state's purview? And so what the permit program will do is require any type of handling of the material, you'll need a permit. So that's if you're transporting it, if you're applying it to land, and if you're storing it. So the state permit would be required if you site a storage tank in a particular community. Now, importantly, the approvals associated with that siting will still fall to the local government. So you can't get the permit unless there are all local approvals for siting the tank already obtained by the permittee in advance. That's something that got written into the bill. I know the Caroline commissioners were very interested in making sure that got in there, and others who want to continue to retain this local siting authority. So it's almost a two-step. You got to have that local approval, and then you got to go get your state permit. So both of those measures together should do a good job of controlling the risks and concerns that community members experience with this stuff.
What kind of limits, by the way, are you expecting from the Department of Agriculture on farmers in terms of applying this to their fields?
Well, farmers are already subject to nutrient management plan regulations in Maryland, so that will continue. There were some in the industry that wanted to clarify the nutrient management terms that would apply to this particular material, and I thought those were good amendments to the bill. And so, when the material is applied to land, those nutrient management regulations need to be followed. What the permit will do is will enable additional protections just to make sure this unique material really has the controls applied to it to ensure that the communities and the environments are protected.
Now, I also understand that you were pushing to try to expand the living shore line issue in terms of trying to get more, for instance, living shore replacing some of the armored shorelines, but it didn't exactly turn out as well as you would have hoped.
Well, it was a relatively minor fix to the existing state law passed some years ago. I guess it might have been around 10 years ago that says, it is a requirement if you are going to be restoring your shoreline in the state of Maryland. The techniques that you need to use are the living shoreline techniques. A lot of folks are familiar with, the stone revetments or riprap or the hard bulkheads to help control erosion and make sure that wave energy doesn't erode the shoreline away. Those can be appropriate in high wave energy circumstances. A lot of the bay and the rivers and streams doesn't have that high wave energy and doesn't necessarily need such a robust structural control to deal with that wave energy. Where the living shoreline technique is fully appropriate, using plants, grasses, trees, along with core fiber logs and other soft controls to manage the wave energy, but also ensure that there is wildlife habitat enabled for the critters that need it. Terrapin turtles, for example, climb on shore and bury their eggs into shoreline. They can't do that if there's a bulkhead there. And that living edge, between land and water is so rich from a biological standpoint. Just looking historically over the bay, that's why we have the rich diversity of over 3,000 species here. A lot of it has to do with that land-water interface, and we keep that area natural. That provides, not only wildlife habitat, but water quality benefits as well. Filtering the water when it runs off the landscape through that last ribbon of defense. These living shorelines are critically important. So the state said some years back, you want to restore your shoreline, living shoreline is the standard that we use. Now, you can get an exception from the state to put in a structural control like a revetment stone, bulkhead, but that request to go around the living shoreline standard needs to be approved by MDE. What the bill said is that if you have an existing structural control, you aren't automatically eligible then to replace that existing bulkhead revetment stone structure with another structural control. It's not an automatic right. Then you would need to look at the living shoreline alternative there as well. And it's just an opportunity just to ask the question, we know there was a hard structure here, that needs replacement for whatever reason now. Is it appropriate to try and convert that to a living shoreline so that we can get those wildlife and water quality benefits that we know Marylanders want, communities want, the Bay needs? And so that bill did not make it through. It got stuck in committee. We're going to be working with the agency and see if we'll bring it back next year or not.
Also, we have, I guess it's Empower, incentives towards electrification. What are we doing on that level?
Well, that bill passed. We haven't been working as much in the energy space. One of the bills that was really a top priority, not only of the Bay Foundation, but also the Chesapeake Bay Commission, Maryland League of Conservation Voters, a number of partners that advocate for the environment, as well as the administration and the General Assembly itself. This is the whole Watershed Act, and this is really the major priority for the environment that I know the Moore administration was pushing, as well as the environmental community, and really looking comprehensively at the bay restoration effort, what's been working and what's not, and how can we really move the needle. You know, a lot of folks, I get a lot of questions from folks saying, look, Alan, the Bay Foundation has been doing this a long time, you know, but we're not seeing the pace and the speed of restoration. I mean, we are making progress, but people feel like it's not as slow, not as quick as it should be, given the 40, 50 years of investment. And scientists actually looked at that and said, yeah, you know, there's an implementation gap, there's a response gap, there's concern about focusing water quality improvement in the deep trench of the bay, you know, which is really the anchor of the science for the bay restoration effort. And this is an opportunity to restore our shallow water habitat and really begin to reaching a tipping point there that can not only bring back the rivers and streams, but also water quality in the deep trench as well. The scientists got together, they put a report about this out on this comprehensive evaluation of system response last spring, and that got legislators' attention. They said, you know, yeah, we have been making these investments. What do we need to do to, you know, reach these tipping points in targeted areas of the bay? The scientists said, you really got to target these investments rather than having random acts of restoration being put on the landscape. And so this whole Watershed Act that passed essentially creates a pilot program to focus investment in 5 watersheds around the state. Now, the bill doesn't name those watersheds, but it sets criteria to select them, you know, things like geography, land use diversity, also environmental justice concerns are part of the criteria that would be used to select these watersheds for investment. And then the State Department of Natural Resources, together with multiple other state agencies, would serve on an expert panel. And they would select projects from applications that communities submit. It's expected that those applications will be eligible to be received as early as this fall. And then the team would, you know, look at the applicants, identify the 5 watersheds, and then target funding from existing conservation programs, from agriculture, wastewater, stormwater, land preservation is in there as well, really walling off certain pieces of the existing conservation funding at the state level and directing them to these 5 watersheds with a integrated state agency panel steering the investment, so that those regulatory agencies can coordinate and make sure that the investment is efficient, hitting the marks in terms of outcomes. The bill calls for expedited permitting of projects in those selected watersheds. So it's really a way to foster collaboration and innovation, provide guidance, support, and the funding needed to tackle comprehensive projects, and rapidly improve, you know, the waterways that are on the federal dirty waters list. This includes the bay, many of the rivers and streams that drain to the bay, targeting the effort and moving the needle on bay restoration through the whole Watershed Act.
We've been speaking with Alan Girard. He's the Eastern Shore Director of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Thanks very much, Don.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.